think of that phrase and how so many times people find themselves doing things that they ought not to be doing. And sometimes people act like saints that they can't stop. I remember a folklore tale. Some of you may have heard it before, but I find it fitting for this message tonight. It is a story about the scorpion and the frog. The scorpion was on the bank of the river, and he was trying to figure out how he was going to get across this fast streaming water. He looked down the bank of the river, and he saw a frog. Some use fox. He saw a frog getting ready and preparing himself to cross the river. So he went up to the frog and said, "Can you give me a lift across the river?" And the frog looked at him and said, "No, because I'll give you a ride across this river, you're going to sting me." And the scorpion began to persuade him by saying, "I'm not going to sting you, because if I sting you, we both will drown." The frog thought about it for a second and said, "Okay." So the scorpion jumped on his back and began to ride, swim across the river. He got halfway through the river, and the scorpion stung the frog. The frog felt the sting. Then he started feeling the venom, the poison coming through his body, streaming through. And he looked at the scorpion and said, "Why did you do that? Now we're both going to drown and die." And the scorpion said, "I can't help it. It's in my nature." The moral of the story is that the behavior of some creatures cannot be controlled. No matter how you treat them, and no matter what the consequence, the nature of a thing. When we look at a bird flying, we know that its nature is to fly. See a fish swimming in the water, we know it's his nature to swim in the water. But when we look at us before Christ, the fallen state of man, his flesh, or what we would say sometimes the sinful nature, we know that anybody that lives or have the sinful nature will do sinful things. And no matter how hard they try to be righteous, they can't. No matter what they try to do, a man living in the flesh or in the sinful nature will do sinful things. So don't get mad at those sinners on the job or wherever you may be because they're cussing. Because they're talking about what they did last night that's kind of like perverted or gross to you. You don't want to hear it. How dare you? How can you? But what else do you expect from them? Hallelujah. Sinners do sinful things. My brothers and sisters, when we talk about the sinful nature, the flesh, if an individual is in the flesh, we expect them to do things that are sinful. The Bible points that out and make that clear to us. If we would go to the book of Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19. Hallelujah. Here it says, now the works of the flesh, the acts, the works of the flesh. That word flesh, the root word, comes from the Greek, which means the human nature with all its frailties, which include physical and moral frailties. It speaks of that part of man that is groping and living in sin and hostile to God. If you would go with me to Romans, and I'm coming back, Romans chapter 8, verse number 7. Because the carnal mind, that's the same word we just read, flesh, they just use carnal here. And over in Galatians, it used flesh, but it's the same Greek word. Because the carnal mind, or the mind of the flesh, is enmity against God, that carnal mind. That mind that has no divine influences upon it. That's why being in the flesh is hard to receive the word, the seed, to be planted in you. That kind of person is hostile. He's enmity against God. He's hostile against God. So then, when we talk about the flesh, if you would go back with me to Galatians 5 and 19. Hallelujah. So he says, now the works of the flesh are manifest or obvious, are clearly seen. Hallelujah. There's no mystery to it. Just look around you, you see the works of the flesh all over the place. Hallelujah. Which are these? Then he go on to name adultery, fornication, uncleanness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, all these variants, immolation, wrath, strife, sedition, heresy, envy, murder, drunkenness, revelings, and the such, or things that are like this. See, this is not an exhaustive list of the works of the flesh or of the human nature in its weakness, in its depraved state. Hallelujah. These are just giving you a few things. This is a nature that you were born with. If you would go with me and come right back to John chapter 3 and verse number 6. 6, verse 6. Verse 6, 3 and 6. There you go, thank you. And this is Jesus speaking to Nicodemus, talking about being born again. But he says, that which is born of the flesh is flesh. Born that way. Now, I know we protest against homosexuals that say they're born that way because we know they can change. But with a certain point of view, I like to just say, if you go back with me to Galatians chapter 5 and verse 19, that maybe not from the way they look at it, but from the way I look at it, point of view, they were born that way. Because that's a work of a flesh. They were born of the flesh, and part of that flesh, when you look at the word fornication, is not just talking and speaking about a man and a woman having sexual relations outside of marriage. All kinds. It can even include adultery, though adultery is up there. It can include incest. It includes bestiality. But it can also include homosexuality. So when a person, my act may not be our act in the flesh when we was on the other side before we got saved, but every single one of us committed acts, sinful acts that came from the flesh. The works that was of the flesh. And that's just one of them, homosexuality. And just like I can stop lying, they can stop being a homosexual. Hallelujah. Thank you. So